It started with little things, barely noticeable at first, but they piled up, and something in me shifted. Victor used to be so present, so predictable. But lately, his smiles felt hollow, his words shorter. He began working late, claiming deadlines, urgent meetings, always some vague reason why dinner had to get cold. And his phone? Suddenly it never left his hand. Always face down, always with a quick tap or swipe when I got too close. I told myself not to overthink. But deep down, a quiet voice had already started asking the questions I didn't want answered. I tried to talk to him, gently, carefully, not because I didn't have a right to ask, but because I already knew how he'd react. He rolled his eyes, gave me that tired laugh and said, "You're imagining things. Stop being so dramatic." Dramatic. That word cut through me sharper than anything else. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it was the first time I didn't flinch. I just sat there, watching him like I was seeing him for the first time. Not the man I married, but a stranger wearing his voice. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling while he scrolled through his phone. And in that silence, I made a decision. If he really thought I was blind, if he believed I would keep swallowing his lies with a smile, then he had no idea who he was really married to. The next few days, I paid attention. Real attention. Not the casual glances of a wife trying to give space, but the kind of watchfulness that comes from knowing something's rotting beneath the surface. I watched how he texted with a smirk and angled his body away from me. How his cologne was stronger. How he shaved on days he never used to care. Every detail felt louder now, like a puzzle that had always been there, but I'd finally started to piece together. And with each new clue, I stopped asking why and started thinking what next. You see, I've never been the kind of woman to scream or make scenes. I believe in silence, the powerful kind, the kind that watches, that plans. While he was out doing God knows what, I was remembering the woman I used to be. Sharp, resilient, not some dramatic wife clinging to a fading marriage, but someone who knew how to stand on her own. I wasn't going to beg him for honesty. I was going to let him keep lying, because every lie gave me time. And time, I realized, was my greatest weapon. So I smiled more. I laughed when he made jokes. I kissed him goodnight and let him believe I was still in the dark. But something in my eyes must have changed, because every now and then he'd look at me just a second longer, like he couldn't quite read what was behind my calm. And the truth? That's exactly how I wanted it. There's a moment, a very specific kind of moment, when you stop loving someone and start watching them, not out of hate, but out of clarity. That was me now. Every dinner, every conversation, every casual touch he gave me, I received like an actress hitting her mark. I wasn't heartbroken. I was calculating. I watched him lie and wondered how long he'd keep it up. Did he think I was stupid? That I'd never noticed the scent that wasn't mine on his collar, or the hesitation when I asked who'd called? He thought he was pulling something off. He thought I was too busy, too trusting, too naive. And honestly, maybe for a while I was. But now I was wide awake. And the funny thing is, I didn't even want the truth from him anymore. I already knew it. What I wanted was control. Not to scream, not to destroy, but to leave when it hurt the most. On my terms, with my head held high and no part of myself left behind. So when he kissed my forehead that night, whispering, "I love you," I didn't flinch. I smiled, nodded, and said it back. And in my mind, I whispered something else entirely. "You're going to regret underestimating me." I became two women, the one he saw, soft, sweet, dutiful, and the one behind the curtain, silent and watchful. It started with his receipts. The ones he left crumpled in his pockets or tossed into the car's console, never thinking twice. I unfolded them carefully, like evidence from a crime scene. Dinners for two at places I'd never been, boutique hotel charges, and once, a florist. Roses. Red. I haven't received flowers from him in over a year. That told me everything I needed to know. Next came the locations. I quietly synced our shared accounts, tracked the pings, watched the routes. Always the same neighborhood. Always the same hours. It was methodical, almost insulting. I wasn't trying to catch him anymore. I was documenting him, building a file, piece by piece, lie by lie. One afternoon while he was in the shower, I found the second phone, hidden behind a stack of old boxes in the closet. I opened it, and there they were. The photos. Her face. His arms. Their smiles. And still, I didn't cry. I just put it back exactly where I found it, as if nothing had happened. Because in my world now, nothing had. Not yet. That night, I made his favorite meal, the one he always asked for on his birthday. I set the table, lit a candle, poured his wine just the way he liked it, half a glass, no ice, room temp. He walked in, kissed my cheek, and smiled like everything was fine. And I let him believe it was. We laughed. We talked. I even complimented his shirt, the same one he wore in those pictures with her. Inside, I was ice. But on the outside, I was the woman he thought he had completely fooled. Every night I kissed him goodnight and told him I loved him. Every morning, I packed his lunch and ironed his shirt. And while he went off to play pretend with her, I was on the phone with lawyers. Quiet voices, clear terms, no emotions, just facts and steps. I started moving small amounts of money, setting up accounts in my name only. One day, I even went to the bank and smiled at the teller while mentally calculating how long until I'd have enough to start fresh. It felt like I was digging a tunnel with a spoon. Slow, steady, but certain. But here's the thing. He had no clue. He looked at me and saw the same wife, the same woman who once cried when he forgot an anniversary. But that woman? She was gone. And the one wearing her face was someone new. Someone he had never met and wouldn't recognize even if she stared him right in the eye. At night, after he fell asleep beside me, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing. Not just what I would say, but how I'd say it. Calm, direct, powerful. I didn't want revenge in the way people imagine it. I didn't want to scream or throw things or beg him to feel guilty. I wanted something cleaner, something colder. I wanted him to realize he'd lost me long before he even knew it was possible. That every moment I played the doting wife, I was actually slipping out of the cage he built around me. I started keeping a journal. Not for healing, not for closure, but as a timeline, a record. I documented the exact dates, the times, the details he thought would disappear into the fog of everyday life. There was power in it. Power in knowing that while he thought he was controlling the narrative, I was quietly writing my own. One with an ending he could never see coming. I'd reread it sometimes just to remind myself this wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. And the most ironic part? The better I became at pretending, the more he relaxed. He actually smiled more, held my hand in public again. Maybe he thought he'd gotten away with it. Maybe he believed his lie had taken root so deep that I'd stopped questioning it. But I hadn't. I was just waiting. And soon, very soon, he'd find out exactly how much I'd seen. I knew I was close. The pieces were all there. The evidence, the plan, the quiet fire burning behind every smile I gave him. But before I left, before I ended it on paper, I wanted one final act. One scene he'd remember for the rest of his life. So I got to work. I made copies of every bank statement, every message, every receipt. I signed a lease for a place that was mine. No shared bills, no shared walls. And I made sure my career was steady, like a bridge already built before the leap. I didn't want chaos. I wanted certainty. So I checked everything twice. My lawyer had all the files. My new apartment had fresh sheets and unopened dishes. My bank account had enough to get me through the storm. And through it all, I kept the rhythm of normal life. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings. I smiled, told him, "Have a good day," and watched him walk out the door like he wasn't heading straight into the trap he created himself. He had no idea what was coming, and I made sure to keep it that way. Then I circled a date on the calendar. Not for him, but for me. My liberation day. But before that, there was the dinner. One final performance. Candlelight, soft music, his favorite wine breathing on the table. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him relaxed. I wanted him to feel, for just one more night, like he still had it all. He walked through the door like any other evening, loosened tie, keys in one hand, a tired sigh in the other. But when he saw the table, he paused. "What's the occasion?" he asked, smiling, surprised. I just laughed softly, shaking my head like a woman still in love. "Do I need a reason to spoil you?" I said. And just like that, he melted into the moment. He didn't suspect a thing. He kissed my cheek, complimented the roast, poured the wine like it was a celebration. And in a way, it was. Just not for him. We talked about nothing. His work, the weather, someone's new baby. I nodded, I listened, I laughed at all the right places. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I watched him the way a stranger would, studying the lines of his face, the way he held his glass, the small lies tucked into casual stories. It was almost fascinating, how easily he lived inside his delusion. How sure he was that he was winning, that I was still his, that I was still me. But the woman at that table wasn't his anymore. She belonged to herself now. He reached for my hand across the table, and I gave it to him. I let him hold it like it meant something. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt release. Like I had just walked out of a long, dark hallway and could finally see the exit. He still thought the story was going the way he wrote it. But I had already rewritten the ending. After dinner, he leaned back in his chair, satisfied, full, relaxed, a little wine drunk. I cleared the dishes while he scrolled through his phone, the same one that held 1,000 lies. And I watched him from the kitchen, wondering if he'd ever realize how easy it was to fool him. Not because I'm deceptive, but because he never thought I could be. That was his mistake. He believed I needed him more than I needed the truth. And now, he was sitting in a house full of secrets, thinking he was safe. I tucked him in that night like nothing had changed, kissed his forehead, turned off the light, and whispered goodnight. He smiled in the dark and told me he loved me. And I said it back, calmly, evenly, with no weight behind the words. I lay beside him in silence, listening to his breathing slow as he drifted off. My mind wasn't on him anymore. It was on the next morning, on the papers, on the drive to my lawyer, on the sound his world would make when it finally cracked open. He slept like a man who thought he was loved, and I stayed awake like a woman who knew her moment was coming, not with fury, not with chaos, but with something far more unsettling: peace. I woke up before the sun. No alarm, no noise, just instinct. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that almost hums. He was still asleep, tangled in the sheets, unaware. I didn't even look back. I got dressed, grabbed the folder, and walked out like I was heading to the grocery store. But I wasn't. I was heading straight to my freedom. My lawyer was already waiting. I slid the folder across the table, and she opened it like a story she already knew. Photos, records, dates, patterns, the full picture. There was no drama, just signatures, confirmations, steps. I'd already done the emotional work. Now it was logistics. She asked if I was ready. I told her I had been ready for weeks. We finalized the documents, reviewed the timeline, and I took a deep breath. Not because I was nervous, but because I finally felt like I was exhaling after holding it in for far too long. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. That surprised me. I guess part of me expected to feel broken, but I didn't. I felt clear. By the time I got home, the sun was high, and so was my sense of calm. I walked into that house not as a wife, not as a woman scorned, but as a woman carrying truth. Truth he couldn't twist, couldn't laugh off, couldn't erase. And when I saw him standing there in the kitchen, pouring his coffee like it was just another day, I realized he still had no idea today would be the last time we shared anything. He looked up, smiled lazily. "You're up early," he said, sipping his coffee like nothing had shifted in the universe. I didn't answer. I just set the divorce papers on the kitchen table, right beside his mug. Then, without a word, I pulled the USB drive from my bag and placed it next to them. That was when his smile faltered. He glanced at the papers, then at me. What is this?" he asked, trying to laugh. But there was no laughter in my face, only silence. He was good at pretending, but I was better. He picked up the folder, flipped through the first few pages, and I watched the color drain from his face. Names, phone numbers, timestamps, photos. He opened the USB folder on his laptop and found everything I knew he would. Call logs, text screenshots, hotel bills, all neat. All categorized, all undeniable. He tried to speak, tried to pull together a version of the truth that might still save him, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. "This isn't a discussion, it's a notification. I know everything." The air changed. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. For the first time in this whole mess, he looked small, powerless, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like standing in the eye of a storm that had already passed. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was just a man who didn't realize how far I'd gone before he even noticed I was leaving. He reached for me, not in love, not even in apology, but in desperation. And I took a step back, not because I was angry, but because I was done. "While you were busy cheating," I said, voice steady, "I was busy rebuilding without you." His eyes darted around the room like he was searching for something to anchor himself to, but there was nothing. Not a plea he could make, not a memory strong enough to change what I had already decided. The man who once made me feel chosen now looked like a stranger searching for the exit in his own life. He whispered my name, like maybe it would bring me back. But I didn't answer. I just gathered the papers, left a copy for him, and turned toward the door. And in that moment, I felt taller. Not stronger, taller. Like I had finally grown beyond the version of myself that once needed his love to feel complete. And as I reached for the doorknob, I paused, just for a second, to look at him one last time. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shouting. He was just still, like a man who'd realized too late that the game was over. And I walked out. Not because I hated him, but because I loved myself more than I ever had before. My new apartment wasn't fancy. It didn't have marble countertops or skyline views. But it was mine. The walls were bare, the fridge half empty, and the air smelled like fresh paint and lavender cleaner. Still, I stood in the middle of that little living room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I kicked off my shoes, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. And I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally let go of everything that had been weighing me down. I posted one photo, just one. Me, cross-legged, wine in hand, soft lighting from the window spilling across my face. No caption about heartbreak, no announcement. Just a line I knew would say everything. Some people lose diamonds while chasing stones. Within minutes, the messages started coming in. Friends, family, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Are you okay? What happened? You look free. And I was. I didn't owe anyone the full story. I had already lived it. What they saw in that photo was real, and I didn't need to explain it. Victor called. Of course he did. But I never picked up, not once. I didn't block his number out of spite. I blocked it because I no longer needed to hear what he had to say. There was nothing left for him to give me. Not closure, not answers, certainly not guilt. I had already taken everything I needed, and it didn't come from him. It came from within. The days that followed felt like waking up from a long, heavy sleep. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells or watching someone else's moods to gauge how my day would go. I set my own alarm, made my own coffee just the way I liked it, strong, black, and quiet. I started listening to music again while I got dressed. I opened the windows, let the breeze in. The silence in my new space didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. It felt like I had made room for myself in a life I used to hand over to someone else. Some people were shocked. They couldn't believe it. But you two looked so happy, they said. Of course we did. That's what I'd let them see. That's what he needed them to see. But the truth? The truth had been living beneath the surface for a long time, hidden in late nights, sudden cold shoulders, and the ache you feel when the person lying next to you might as well be on another planet. I didn't care to explain it to everyone. I just let their confusion sit. Let it pass. Because I finally understood something. The people who matter don't need an explanation. And as for him, word got around. Quiet whispers, judging eyes. Some of his colleagues pulled away. A few friends messaged me, apologizing without using the word. I didn't celebrate his fall. I didn't need to. His unraveling wasn't my revenge. My peace was. My quiet, my calm, my freedom. That was the echo that followed every lie he ever told. A few weeks later, I walked into my new job. Fresh start, new team, clean slate. I wore the heels I hadn't touched in over a year, not for him, not for anyone else, but because they made me feel like I could walk through fire without flinching. I stepped into that office with my head held high, a quiet confidence in every movement. No one there knew my story. No one looked at me with pity or whispered behind my back. I was just Camilla. Not a wife, not a betrayal, not a headline. Just me. And that was the most powerful part. My story didn't end with heartbreak. It didn't end with confrontation or chaos. It ended with a woman sitting across from herself, finally choosing peace over performance. I didn't need to destroy him to reclaim myself. I just had to walk away, fully, completely, without hesitation. That was the kind of revenge that couldn't be undone. It didn't scream. It didn't beg. It just was. Sharp as truth. Soft as grace. I took a deep breath that morning. A full breath, with no weight on my chest. I straightened my blazer, looked out the window, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally was. And somewhere out there, a man was still trying to figure out how he lost something he thought he had forever, while I was too busy living to even notice.
The company needs to evolve beyond your limited capabilities, old sister, Dylan said smugly, sliding termination papers across the mahogany desk. Time to make room for real innovation. I picked up the document with steady hands, maintaining the neutral expression that had become second nature during 15 years of corporate politics. For a moment, I locked eyes with my younger brother. His triumphant smirk contrasted sharply with the tastefully framed family photos behind him, artifacts of a supposed legacy of loyalty. My name is Vanessa King, and at 44, I had spent a third of my life developing and managing the proprietary software system that powered Kingline Ventures, our family's logistics and inventory firm based in Pittsburgh. I wasn't just the IT lead. I had built the entire system from scratch, writing countless lines of code to create a framework that managed real-time shipments, automated billing, and tracked vendors across 3 continents. Is this really how you want to start your tenure as managing director? I asked, tapping the termination papers against the table to align their edges. Not even a week in the big office and already making sweeping changes? Dylan leaned back in our father's chair, a chair that, despite being reupholstered twice, still carried the impression of our father's commanding presence. But unlike our father, whose decisions were tempered with experience and consideration, Dylan had always acted on impulse and ego. The board agrees we need fresh perspectives, he replied, adjusting his silk tie. They've approved bringing in Vortex Solutions to overhaul our digital infrastructure. Their team will modernize everything: machine learning, cloud integration, the works. Things I've been advocating for years while you've kept us tethered to your homemade system. I almost laughed at how he said homemade, like I'd been knitting scarves instead of engineering an integrated logistics framework that had saved the company millions and outperformed every commercial alternative. But I didn't correct him. I never did. That was perhaps my greatest mistake over the years, assuming that my work would speak for itself. You have 2 weeks of severance, Dylan continued. Human Resources has already processed everything. Your credentials will remain active until end of day tomorrow to tie up any loose ends. As I rose from my chair, I noticed my brother already looking past me, at his computer screen, moving on. He didn't see the slight smile that crossed my face, not one of acceptance, but of understanding. Dylan had never bothered to comprehend what I actually did for Kingline Ventures, and very soon that ignorance would become painfully apparent. Growing up as the Kings of Pittsburgh had its challenges. Our father, Edward King, built Kingline Ventures from a 2-truck operation into a regional powerhouse that coordinated logistics for manufacturers across the Rust Belt. We lived in a sprawling Victorian in Shadyside, a world of private schools and country club memberships. While Dylan excelled at sports and charming adults at business dinners, I gravitated toward computers and mathematics. My father recognized my analytical mind early, buying me my first computer when I was 12. By 16, I was creating basic inventory tracking programs. When I graduated with my computer science degree, he didn't hesitate to bring me into the family business. One day, the world will run on information more than steel, he told me, displaying a rare prescience for someone who'd built his fortune on physical infrastructure. You'll help us stay ahead of that curve. My first major contribution came when our existing logistics software, an expensive third-party solution, failed during a major client onboarding. Working through 3 sleepless nights, I developed a stopgap measure that not only salvaged the client relationship, but proved more efficient than the original system. That was when Dad gave me the green light to develop a complete proprietary system. Build something just for us, he said. Something that fits exactly how we work. Over the next decade, I did exactly that, layering in specialized modules, custom-designed APIs, and lightning-fast routing algorithms that accommodated our growing business. The system became our competitive edge, allowing us to undercut competitors while maintaining higher profit margins. But as my system became indispensable, my role as its creator was increasingly taken for granted. Dylan, meanwhile, returned from business school with grand theories about disruption and digital transformation. He'd dismiss my work during board meetings, calling it legacy technology, while proposing partnerships with flashy tech startups. Our father always mediated, understanding that Dylan's vision had merit, but appreciating the reliability of what I'd built. Your brother sees the future, Dad would tell me during our regular coffee meetings. But you've built our present, Both matter. Then came Dad's unexpected retirement announcement, accelerated by minor heart issues. The board's choice of Dylan for managing director stung, but didn't surprise me. He had the charisma and connections that I lacked, plus a vision that sounded exciting to members who didn't understand the technical complexities involved. What did surprise me was how quickly he moved to dismantle what I'd built. The termination papers in my hands represented more than personal rejection. They signaled a fundamental misunderstanding of how deeply my code was woven into the company's operations. I cleared my desk methodically that afternoon, packing away 15 years of professional life into a single cardboard box. The few personal items, a potted succulent, framed photos of hiking trips, a small collection of tech conference lanyards, seemed inadequate representations of my time at Kingline. Jennifer from Human Resources hovered awkwardly nearby, tasked with ensuring I didn't steal company property or sabotage anything on my way out. She was new, barely 6 months with the company, and clearly uncomfortable with evicting someone who had occupied this office longer than most employees had been with the firm. "I'm really sorry about this, Vanessa," she said in a hushed tone. "Everyone in IT is shocked." "It's business," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't. It was personal, the culmination of a sibling rivalry that had finally found its resolution. I glanced at my computer screen one last time. Open on it was the dashboard for the Kingline Integrated System, KIS as the team called it. The interface was deceptively simple, showing real-time status of hundreds of shipments, color-coded inventory levels across warehouses, and financial projections updated to the minute. What wasn't visible was the complexity beneath. The custom architecture I'd built, maintained, and continuously improved for years. I had 24 hours before my credentials were revoked. 24 hours to decide what to do with the knowledge in my head that wasn't documented anywhere else. "Protocol says I need to ask for your master password override," Jennifer said, reading from her offboarding checklist. I smiled slightly. "It's in the system documentation. Dylan has access to all that now." This wasn't entirely true. While basic documentation existed, the deeper architecture, the shortcuts, the workarounds, the contingency protocols, those lived only in my mind and in secured notes that weren't part of the official documentation. Not out of malice or job security fears, but because complex systems evolve organically, and documentation always lags behind reality. As I walked toward the elevator, carrying my small box of belongings, I passed the glass-walled conference room where Dylan was meeting with representatives from Vortex Solutions. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing enthusiastically while a team of consultants nodded along, their sleek presentation displayed on the wall screen. One slide caught my eye. Seamless migration from legacy systems. I almost stopped to tell them there was nothing seamless about integrating with KS, that the system was deliberately designed with security layers that required specific knowledge to navigate. I almost warned them about the cascading dependencies that could trigger catastrophic failures if modified incorrectly. Almost. Instead, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. I hadn't built back doors or booby traps into the system. I'd always been too professional for that. I didn't need to sabotage anything. The system itself, with all its complexity and customization, would do that for me if mishandled. As the elevator doors closed, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 days passed in a strange, unfamiliar calm. Without the constant ping of crisis emails and the pressure of system maintenance, I found myself with time I hadn't experienced since college. I slept past 6 a.m., went for morning runs along the Monongahela River, and actually sat down for breakfast instead of gulping coffee on the way to the office. On the 3rd morning after my termination, I was enjoying a leisurely coffee on my balcony when my personal phone vibrated. Caitlin Joe's name flashed on the screen, head of client services at Kingline, and one of the few colleagues I considered a friend. "Vanessa?" Her voice carried an unmistakable edge of panic. "Are you watching this?" "Watching what?" The Westbridge presentation. Dylan's doing it live on the company feed for all departments to see. He's about to... She broke off, and I heard commotion in the background. Oh God, it's happening again. I pulled up the company's internal live stream on my tablet, using the credentials that apparently hadn't been deactivated yet. The video showed our largest conference room, where Dylan stood before executives from Westbridge Manufacturing, a potential client worth at least $15 million annually. He was mid-sentence, gesturing toward the large display behind him that showcased the KIS dashboard, which allows us to guarantee 99.8% on-time delivery and complete transparency across your supply chain, he was saying confidently. Then it happened. The dashboard behind him flickered, displaying a cascade of error messages before freezing completely. Dylan continued speaking for several seconds before realizing something was wrong. He glanced back, his professional smile faltering. "Just a momentary glitch," he said, tapping frantically at his tablet. "Let me just refresh the..." But the system didn't refresh. Instead, a critical error message appeared. "Database integrity compromised. System lockdown initiated." I knew exactly what had happened. The KIS had a self-protection protocol I'd implemented years ago after a corrupted update nearly destroyed our shipping data. When it detected potential data corruption, it would automatically lock down to prevent catastrophic loss. Restarting required a specific sequence of commands and administrator verification, a procedure only I had performed until now. Dylan was still trying to recover, his confident demeanor crumbling. "Our technical team will have this resolved momentarily," he assured the increasingly skeptical-looking Westbridge executives. My phone began lighting up with texts and calls, from IT staff, from operations managers, and finally from Dylan himself. I silenced it and continued watching the disaster unfold. Within minutes, reports began flooding the emergency channel in the company's messaging system. Warehouse terminals offline, shipping labels unable to generate, billing system frozen. The entire operation had ground to a halt. A sick satisfaction settled in my stomach, followed immediately by guilt. These were still my colleagues struggling through no fault of their own. The clients being affected had done nothing wrong. Only Dylan deserved this humiliation. My phone rang again, this time displaying Edward King, my father. I hesitated before answering. "Vanessa." His voice carried none of its usual commanding presence. Instead, he sounded tired, worried. "The system's down." "I know," I replied. "I'm watching it happen." "Dylan says it's a systematic failure, that your architecture was fundamentally flawed and finally collapsed." I laughed bitterly. Of course he'd say that. The system isn't flawed. It's protecting itself from whatever they're trying to do to it. A long silence stretched between us before my father spoke again. "Can you fix it?" The question hung in the air. Could I? Certainly. Would I? That was more complicated. "I don't work for King Line anymore, Dad," I finally said. Dylan made that very clear. My father sighed heavily through the phone. "This isn't just about you and Dylan, Vanessa. There are 300 employees whose jobs depend on getting things running again, not to mention our clients." The guilt I'd felt earlier intensified. He was right. My satisfaction at Dylan's predicament came at the expense of many innocent people. But the wounded part of me, the part that had been dismissed and discarded after 15 years of dedication, wasn't ready to concede. "Dylan should have thought about that before firing the only person who fully understands the system," I replied. "Besides, he has Vortex Solutions now. Aren't they supposed to be modernizing everything?" "Vanessa," my father started, but I interrupted him. "I'm sorry, Dad. I have a job interview in an hour. I have to go." This wasn't entirely a lie. I did have an interview scheduled that morning, with Caravel Logistics, a mid-sized competitor that had reached out almost immediately after word of my departure from King Line spread through the industry. Their CTO had been trying to poach me for years. As I dressed for the interview, I couldn't help checking the King Line emergency channel again. The situation was deteriorating. Regional managers were reporting that trucks were idle, drivers were waiting for instructions, and warehouses couldn't process incoming or outgoing shipments. Conservative estimates put the cost of the outage at $50,000 per hour, and climbing. My interview with Caravel went exceptionally well. Their technical team asked intelligent questions about system architecture and showed genuine interest in my approach to logistics software. The CTO, Lawrence Bennett, didn't hide his excitement at the prospect of having me build something for them. "We've been trapped in vendor solutions for too long," he explained as he walked me out. "Having someone in-house who could create something tailored to our needs would be revolutionary." "Someone like me, you mean?" I said with a smile. "Exactly like you." He handed me a folder. "This is our offer. It's aggressive. We want you to know how serious we are. Take a few days to think about it." Back in my car, I opened the folder and nearly gasped. The compensation package was almost double what I'd been making at King Line, with substantial equity and the title of Chief Technology Officer. It was everything I deserved but had never received at the family company. My phone was still blowing up with messages from King Line. I scrolled through them briefly. Dylan demanding I answer his calls, the IT team begging for access codes, even board members reaching out directly. The last message caught my eye, from Caitlin. "Westbridge walked. Dylan is blaming you publicly, saying you sabotaged the system before leaving. Board emergency meeting in progress. Please call me." I felt a surge of anger. Sabotage? I'd spent 15 years building and protecting that system. Its current failure was simple. The Vortex team had likely tried to force integration without understanding the security protocols, triggering the lockdown sequence. Before I could think better of it, I called Dylan. He answered immediately. "Thank God. You need to fix this right now, Vanessa. This is corporate sabotage, and I'm prepared to take legal action." "Stop!" I cut him off. "I didn't sabotage anything. Your fancy consultants triggered a security protocol by trying to force access. If you'd bothered to ask me for a proper handover instead of ambushing me with termination papers, I could have explained how the system works." "Then fix it," he demanded. "Now." "That's not how this works, Dylan. I'm not your employee anymore, remember? You made that abundantly clear." There was a moment of stunned silence before he spoke again, his voice suddenly conciliatory. "What do you want? To come back? Fine. You can have your job back." I couldn't help but laugh. "My job back? After you humiliated me and questioned my capabilities? I don't think so." By evening, the situation at King Line had reached crisis level. Through Caitlin, I learned that the board had called an emergency session where Dylan was struggling to explain both the system failure and his decision to terminate me without a transition plan. The Vortex Solutions team had admitted they couldn't access the core system architecture without proper documentation. Documentation that didn't exist in the official repositories. I sat in my living room, nursing a glass of wine and weighing my options. The Caravel offer was tempting. A clean break, a fresh start, recognition I'd never received at King Line. But 15 years of my life were embedded in the KIS. Watching it fall apart felt like watching a part of myself being dismantled. My doorbell rang at 9 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Dylan standing there looking disheveled, his normally immaculate hair mussed, his designer suit wrinkled. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door. "You win, okay?" he said before I could speak. "I was wrong. We need you. I need you." I leaned against the doorframe, studying my younger brother. At 40, Dylan still carried himself with the entitled confidence of the golden child, the son who had followed perfectly in our father's footsteps while I carved my own technical path. But now, for perhaps the first time, I saw genuine desperation in his eyes. "The board is furious," he continued when I didn't respond. "They're talking about emergency leadership changes. Dad is disappointed. Everyone's blaming me." "As they should," I replied calmly. You fired the architect of the system that runs the entire company without ensuring knowledge transfer. That's not just bad business. It's negligent leadership. He flinched but didn't argue. Tell me what you want. Name your price to fix this. I stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. In my living room, I pulled out my laptop and brought up the Caravel offer letter. Caravel wants me to build them exactly what I built for Kingline, I said, turning the screen toward him. This is what they think I'm worth. Dylan's eyes widened as he saw the compensation package. This is outrageous. They're just trying to steal our technology through you. No, Dylan. They're recognizing my value, something Kingline never did. I closed the laptop. I don't want to be just an IT manager anymore. I want my role to reflect what I actually contribute. What are you saying? I want a board seat and the title of Chief Technology Officer. Equal compensation to yours, and complete autonomy over the technical division. I met his gaze steadily. Those are my terms. Dylan laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. The board would never. Then enjoy explaining to them how you plan to rebuild 15 years of proprietary development from scratch. I interrupted. I'm sure the shareholders will understand when the stock plummets. A tense silence filled the room as my brother processed the situation. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing his pride against the immediate crisis and his longer-term prospects if Kingline suffered a prolonged outage. The board meets again tomorrow morning, he finally said. I'll present your terms, but I can't guarantee they'll accept everything. That's fine, I replied. But I won't step foot in the office or touch a line of code until they do. The system will remain down until then. After Dylan left, I poured myself another glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The Pittsburgh skyline glittered against the night sky, and for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my destiny. Whether I returned to Kingline on my terms or accepted Caravel's offer, one thing was certain. I would never again allow my contributions to be minimized or taken for granted. The next morning, I walked into Kingline's headquarters, wearing a tailored power suit I'd purchased but rarely worn. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, and whispers followed as I crossed the lobby. Word of my return had clearly spread. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes tracked me as I took my seat at the table, not in my usual chair against the wall as an invited technical advisor, but in a proper leather chair between my father and Josephine Winters, our longest-serving board member. Dylan stood at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged years overnight. Behind him, a projection displayed the ongoing system outage metrics. 27 hours of downtime, estimated losses approaching $1. 4 million, 42 delayed shipments, and 17 angry client escalations. Ms. King has agreed to address our technical situation, Dylan announced, his voice carefully controlled. The board has reviewed and accepted her conditions for return. I noted the formal Ms. King rather than my sister, or Vanessa, a small but telling choice that distanced him from the decision. Several board members nodded appreciatively in my direction, while others watched warily, perhaps wondering if I'd deliberately caused the crisis. Before we proceed, I said, opening my laptop, I want to be clear about what happened. The system failure wasn't sabotage or poor design. It was a security protocol I implemented years ago to prevent data corruption. When unauthorized access attempts triggered it, the system did exactly what it was programmed to do: protect itself. I projected my screen, showing the KS master interface, a view none of them had seen before. Behind the sleek user dashboard was a complex matrix of system health indicators, security protocols, and override mechanisms. What you're seeing is the true heart of Kingline's competitive advantage, I explained. A proprietary system that's been customized and optimized over 15 years. It can't simply be replaced by an off-the-shelf solution or rushed migration. The board members leaned forward, suddenly understanding the true value of what I'd built. Even Dylan seemed to grasp finally that my limited capabilities had created something remarkable. With the board's unanimous endorsement of my return, including my new title, compensation, and board seat. I set about restoring Kingline's systems. The process took less than an hour, though I deliberately walked the IT team through each step, ensuring knowledge transfer that should have happened years ago. As systems came back online across the company, the relief was palpable. The messaging channels filled with celebratory messages, warehouse managers reported resuming operations, and drivers finally received their routing instructions. The financial damage was substantial but containable, a painful lesson in technical debt and proper succession planning. The next week brought a flurry of changes. My office moved to the executive floor, adjacent to Dylan's. The IT department was reorganized under my direct leadership, with a mandate to document the system properly and train multiple team members on its architecture. And most satisfyingly, the Vortex Solutions contract was renegotiated from a full replacement to a collaborative enhancement project, working with my team rather than displacing us. Dylan maintained a professional distance, our interactions limited to necessary business discussions. The sibling relationship remained fractured, but I found I didn't mind. Respect was more valuable than familial warmth, especially in a corporate environment. The most meaningful change came from my father. At our first weekly coffee meeting since my return, he acknowledged what he'd failed to see for years. "I always thought Dylan would lead Kingline because he reminds me of myself," he admitted. "But the truth is, you're the one who's truly innovated, who's built something from nothing. I was wrong not to see that sooner." The validation felt good, but I realized it was no longer necessary. The crisis had proven my worth beyond question. To the board, to our employees, and most importantly, to myself. My new business cards arrived that Friday. Vanessa King, Chief Technology Officer, Board Member. Looking at them, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with finally receiving the recognition I'd earned. As the dust settled and operations returned to normal, I reflected on how sweet success tasted when it came from standing your ground rather than tearing others down. I hadn't needed to sabotage anything. I just had to wait for the gap I left behind to reveal its true size.